Hi everyone, this is Chapter 2, Counseling Across Cultures for Counseling 2500. Okay, let's start with the introduction. Counseling theories and practice have been greatly impacted by changing demographics and social dynamics. So, what that basically is saying is that our population is growing more and more diverse each day. Non Hispanic white is the largest group, but is also the slowest in growing. So when you hear the word non-Hispanic white, the reason why we use that term is because for a while Hispanics were considered white and then they were not considered white. This is through the history of America. So non-Hispanic white is basically a Caucasian or a white person. Okay. And then there's Hispanic and Asian populations, the fastest growing, due partially to immigration. There's about 9 million, or 2.9% of those who will choose a biracial or multiple racial categories. 9 million identify as LGBT, and 36 million have disabilities. Although the US is the most affluent country in the world, affluent means riches, wealthy. We also have the highest number, one of the highest numbers of people in poverty, 43.6 million people. So, it's kind of funny and sad at the same time that although we are the richest, we also live in a world where certain people do not get anything or get through years of racism and discrimination. The richest country also has some of the poorest people too. Roles of men and women have changed. Needs and challenges of aging adults, as well, is something that we need to start to talk about as well because people are living longer. Now let's talk about the nature of the counseling across cultures. So, working aligns between a counselor and the clients that take the personal dynamics of the counselor and the clients into consideration, alongside the dynamics found in the cultures of both of these individuals. So, we're talking about is, although counseling was developed in a very specific perspective, which is typically considered as a white perspective, white European perspective, we can adjust it towards our diverse group in America. Okay, there are 6 principles for counseling across cultures. Number 1, culture refers to any group of people who identify or associate with one another on the basis of some common purpose, need, or similarity of background. Number 2, cultural differences are the real and they influence all human interactions. 3, all counseling is cross cultural in nature. So, what that basically means is typically when you work with someone else in this field, you're going to work with someone who's going to be a little bit different from you in one way or another culturally. Okay. 4, cross cultural counseling places an emphasis on human diversity in all of its many forms. So that means that we need to really understand and focus on those things, right? Like, as in, be aware and learn from that. 5, culturally competent counselors develop awareness, knowledge, and skills to intervene effectively into the lives of people from culturally diverse backgrounds. So even if you are not part of that culture, you should be aware of it to be able to understand. We're not expecting you to know everything about everyone, right? But you need to start learning in school, in courses like this, in multiculturalism class, so that you understand understand where people are coming from, and that your perspective is not the only one that you're using. You can approach it where they are as well. And then 6, culturally competent counselors are globally literate human beings. So what that basically means is you need to start paying attention to the world. Okay, the news is really important so that you understand why certain people are feeling scared at the moment, feeling angry at the moment, and stuff like that, because there is still a lot of injustices when it comes to treating people from different cultures. Counseling across cultures, a conceptual framework. So now we're going to talk about in the following couple slides is the foundational dimension, the cross-cultural dimension, and then cross-cultural counseling competency. And just to make sure we all know what competency means, that means knowledgeable or educated. Okay. So let's talk about the foundational dimension. So whenever you hear the word foundation, foundation is basically whatever is at the bottom of a structure that supports the whole thing, like a building, right? So you want to make sure your foundation is secure so that after you put a bunch of stuff on it, it doesn't tilt over to the side or crack or anything like that. So when it comes to the foundational knowledge that you need to know about culture, we'll talk about these 6 themes here. Okay, number 1 is the foundational knowledge of traditional counseling theory. So you need to know all of the major theories of counseling. Okay, so that you can understand when to apply certain things or why certain people behave or see the world in a specific way. 2, ethical knowledge and aspirations. So ethical knowledge is basically talking about the profession, what is considered appropriate or right to do, and what is not good to do or right to do. 3, cross-cultural theoretical knowledge. So we're talking about multiculturalism, the studies of it. 4, cross-cultural encounters. So working with other people, actually experiencing it, right? 5, cross-cultural counseling skills development. Again, that is building your tool set of how to speak to other people and stuff like that. And 6 is self-awareness, global literacy, and a commitment to social justice. So again, that is paying attention to the news to see what's going on in the world. So let's actually go through these things a little bit more detail with the following slides. Foundational knowledge of traditional counseling theory. Although there are critiques on Western psychology, it is important that the foundation of counseling practice constructed by pioneer thinkers and practitioners such as Freud, Adler, Rogers, Pearls, behavioralists, etc., are incorporated into culturally diverse concepts and approaches. So again, like we said before, a lot of the names that you see there are European white wealthy men. Okay, they're brilliant thinkers though, right? However, a lot of it is influenced by the generation that they lived, right? Freud is known to be what is today considered a misogynist, or basically kind of woman hating, blaming the women for certain things that are happening to people, or if there are any pathologies, some of it is because the mother raised a child wrong. That's what they think, or he thought anyways. But that's because back in that time period, that was socially acceptable. But today's world, a lot of people don't use that component of Freud when they talk about his psychology, even though they acknowledge that he is a brilliant man. Okay, so now we want to use these brilliant thinkers of psychology, and how do we apply it to, let's say, an Asian American, a Black African American, or a Hispanic person, or indigenous person? Yeah, how can we take that knowledge and then adapt it towards people of color? Ethical knowledge and aspirations. Counseling profession rests on ethical practice. So again, what is right and what is wrong. In every field, they have their own set of ethics. Okay, actively attempted to understand the diverse cultural backgrounds of the client they serve, and then putting ethics into the forefront of all professional activity. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about, do no wrong, do no harm, honoring the truths and stuff like that, that are for every person, and then make sure that they are the client anyways, is the most important thing at that moment. Cross-cultural counseling theoretical knowledge. Have a knowledge base that is culturally diverse in ideas and the nature of helping. Plan, implement, and evaluate services in a cross-cultural context. So you're doing all this stuff basically here, except for you're also thinking about it from a multicultural perspective. Okay. The meta theory basically means kind of like a collection of a lot. Okay. When you hear a meta analysis, that means that they're using a bunch of different types of analysis, but they're putting it all together, seeing what is common, and then from there, can we pull out interesting factual stuff from the data. Okay, so the meta theory means putting all these theories together and then seeing what are the essential components of it, of counseling that recognizes both counselor and client identities are embedded in multiple levels of experience and context. Okay, so all of your counseling experiences or theories are talking about the fact that everyone is going to be a little bit different, right? We need to meet them at a specific place, which is where they're at, but also be considerate of who they are as a person throughout the entire time. Dominant and subordinate relationships among groups. So we need to talk about power dynamics, right? Some cultures, they might see a therapist or a counselor as very, very powerful, right? So how does that influence their decision making? Are they just going to say yes to everything? Sense of belonging in the cultural group. So we need to understand, Just because they're Asian doesn't necessarily mean that they're very Asian in culture. Maybe they're very Americanized, right? So we need to also know who they are in that way as well. Cultural identity is the internal vision of oneself as a member of a group. So again, cultural identity is how they see themselves within this population or this group. What does it mean to be a unique human being? Okay. You'll also hear people say, well, I identify as black, but I'm not black in this specific way. So, what does that mean when people say that, right? It's not good or bad. We're trying to understand who they are and how they see themselves in this world. Cross cultural encounters. Competency should include information about the histories, experiences, customs, and values of culturally diverse groups. So, what that is saying is you should meet a variety of people. And thankfully, school is one of those places. When you go to school, you'll meet people who are LGBTQIA. You will meet people who are Black, African American. You'll meet people who are Hispanic, but maybe different types of Hispanic, right? Chicano, but also like, Guatemalan American, Venezuelan American, Puerto Rican, which are Americans. So they're all going to be a little bit different in ways, right? Not limited to books, classes, and workshops. So you shouldn't just do those things. You should actually meet people and talk to them. Personal encounters with people from diverse cultural backgrounds. It's always so interesting to meet people of different cultures. I think, anyways, and I hope that you feel the same way. Get beyond stereotypes and ensure that one sees people as individuals within a cultural context. So as you meet people, don't think that that one person represents all people who are Muslim, right? Or don't believe everyone who is Chinese is going to be like this person. Understand that they're one of many people, but it helps and adds and informs us a little bit more every time we meet another person. All right, cross-cultural counseling skills development. Imperative is just a fancy word for it's really important, right? That counselors enter a cross-cultural helping relationship with a repertoire of skills. Repertoire is basically just like a whole set of something, okay? So a whole set of skills. Develop counseling strategies and techniques that are consistent with the life experiences and cultural values of your client. So as you take multiculturalism and as you meet people in your classes, you'll start to expand your set of skills. You're going to know how to speak to certain people who might be very quiet because of their culture. How do you pull them out into having conversations, let's say, right? Cultural diversity is real and should not be ignored in counseling interactions. Yeah, so you should not ignore them and just say, well, they're just humans, right? They are human, but they are humans that come from a very specific background. And so we want to value that and keep that. Although, obviously, when we talk about being American, some people consider themselves like a melting pot, right? Which is, we're all just Americans. But the truth is, if they have a problem and they cannot make a decision, it might be based on who they are as a person culturally and stuff like that. So we want to make sure that we put that into consideration as well. All right, cultural differences are just that, differences, not deficiencies or pathological deviations. So let's say that a person has a disability, right? That just means that they have a disability. It doesn't mean that they're less of a human than every other person, right? All humans are humans, and that is it. But we do recognize that everyone's a little bit different. And that's fine. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just different. Important to avoid stereotypes and a monolithic perspective. So monolithic is just a fancy word for like meeting one Chinese person and thinking that that person represents all Chinese people, right? That is not true. So we're hoping is that you don't just assume that one person that really likes, let's say, video games and they're Chinese, that all Chinese people love video games, right? That's all we're trying to say there. Right. What buttons, if any, does this client push in me as a result of the obvious cultural differences between us? So for some reason, sometimes when you meet people, they annoy you a little bit, or they frustrate you a little bit, or they make you feel different, right? So you now need to start to think about it from yourself. Like, why is it that this person makes me so uncomfortable? Is it a cultural thing, right? And then work on and go through it and deal with it. Okay. What are some cultural blind spots I may have with respect to this client? So, are there certain things that you are not looking at or you're ignoring because of who they are as a person? As a result of my cultural realities, what strengths do I bring to this counseling relationship? So, as you become much more uh, uh, inclusive, let's say, and welcoming and truly being welcoming to everyone, what is going on in your mind? As a result of my cultural realities, what limitations do I bring to this counseling relationship? So we all were raised with very specific biases about how we see different people. Okay. And so we sometimes automatically just assume those things immediately when we meet someone. And you need to remind yourself, wait a minute, that was just how I was raised because of my family, teaching me these things. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's true. It's really, really hard to erase everything that you were taught when you're a child, right? And we're not asking you to do that. But there are certain things that as you start to live in this world, you'll realize, oh, I think my family was wrong about this, right? And then that's it. You move forward from there. Self awareness. It is important for counselors to fully experience themselves as cultural beings. So, first, you must first be anchored in your own cultural realities. So, what that is saying is to be self aware, you need to know who you are as a person. And I'm sure you've heard me say this before, which is in college, you're trying to get to know who you are as a person. Okay. You don't need to have all the decisions known by the time you graduate, but you should be exploring all these things. Who are you as a person? What are your value systems? Apart from, let's say, your family or other dominant groups. Explore how one's own cultural background has influenced one's psychosocial development. So, how has it, your family being raised the way that you're raised, make you see the world? Consider the role that cultural heritage and customs play in shaping their personality characteristics. And then assess their own process of cultural identity development as well. How do I experience myself as a member of cultural group X? How do I experience other members of cultural group X? And how do I experience people of other cultural backgrounds? So fill in the blank here. Okay, so I'll give you an example here. How do I experience myself as a member of being a Latina, let's say, right? So if I'm a Latina, how do I see myself in this world? And then how do I see and think about other Latinas that I meet? And then also, how do I feel about myself and the relationships when I meet someone who is, let's say, a Black woman? Okay. Again, it's not necessarily talking about good or bad. We're just saying, like, how are you feeling at this moment when you're interacting with, let's say, an Asian female, right? So think about those things. All right. Evaluate the explicit and subtle messages one has received throughout their life about people who are culturally different. So think about how your family raised you in terms of seeing race. Okay. So, for example, maybe you were raised to be really afraid of a certain type of race, right? So, how do you feel about that? And what was wrong that you were taught, right? Because you should not necessarily go, well, I see a person who is this ethnicity and I'm really scared of them. Because not everyone is scared, because there are going to be scary people from all ethnicities, right? But we were raised to see things in a certain way. So I want you to start challenging yourself and thinking about that and wondering why sometimes you feel a certain way. Sometimes you, get scared or whatever, just because you meet someone who is of a different ethnicity, right? It becomes a little silly and it becomes a little bit of a stereotype. And we're getting older and we should realize that those stereotypes are not true. Okay, global literacy. Basic information that a person needs to know in order to successfully navigate life in technological and globally connected world. So one should spend time studying history, anthropology, which is basically, study of humans, sociology, which is the behaviors of humans, economics, which is money, religion, politics, and other social sciences, in an attempt to develop the knowledge based to truly understand the cultural dynamics of a diverse group of people. So here, We're hoping that you do have a well-rounded education so that you understand what is going on, what are the nuances when you hear people talk about politics, about race in politics, what is going on. I hope that you at least start to understand it. If not, you should ask questions about it and start reading up and seeing how you feel about this stuff. In modern times, a globally literate person has knowledge of cultural variations in history. So what that means is, culture changes through time, right? And we need to understand that. Has domestic and international travel experience, and is knowledgeable about current national and international events. Obviously, in today's world, the news can be a little, well, not a little, a lot overwhelming, right? But we should sort of understand the gist of what is going on. Okay, some of it is very uncomfortable. I admit it, and I feel uncomfortable. Sometimes I'll talk to my friend, and go, "What is going on right now?" Right? Because we're trying to process what it means to be us in the society. What is America doing to itself? Um, and then also talk about travel and stuff like that. If you lived in LA this entire time, I would encourage you to maybe leave LA for a little, not like move away, but like, travel, right? Maybe travel to a different city, and then from there, a different state, and maybe even a different country. Obviously, with, safety, issues in mind first and foremost of all. Okay, social justice, equity, power relations, and institutionalized oppression. So you'll hear the word equity quite a bit along with equality. So they're actually a little bit different, but they are related. Okay. So for example, equality means everyone should get something equally. So let's say you're a college student and you're going to receive a computer, right? And you'll get also a keyboard. Let's say a keyboard, right? Okay. So we all have a keyboard. However, your friend has an amputation and only has one hand. That keyboard might not necessarily serve them very well to get what they need to get done, which is typing, right? So equity is saying we recognize that there's something different about you, and we want to also make it sure it's fair for everyone. So let me get you, instead of a regular keyboard, a one-handed keyboard. I don't know if you know that exists, but there's such thing as a one-handed keyboard. So for that way, a person with one hand can also type as well. Does that make sense to you? So that's what equity means, okay? So sometimes equity means sometimes we recognize that everyone is not exactly the same as other people. You might be shorter than everyone else, so you might need to have a ladder that's taller than a person who doesn't necessarily need a ladder, right? Okay, so equity, power relations, and institutionalized oppression, we need to be aware of those things. Ensure that individuals both fulfill their societal roles and receive what is due from society. So we're talking about is distribution of resources is equitable. So again, the word equity here, that's what they're talking about. Is that if we're going to give everyone something so that they can better themselves, certain people might need additional things or different types of things to be able to get the same thing. All members are physically and psychologically safe and secure, so we want to make sure everyone's not in danger. Self-determining and independent. So self-determining means that you are able to make your own decisions about what you want to do. Okay, this is again America, right? And then interdependent basically means that we can rely on each other. You want to discuss oppression, privilege, and social inequities, and be able to talk about those things, because your client might be talking about being discriminated against for, let's say, being LGBTQIA or something like that. So be able to be comfortable enough to talk about those conversations or those topics. I encourage you to practice with your classmates about different things like this, to practice, because you'll never know how you're going to react or say until you actually do it, right? And school is a safe place with trustworthy classmates. Okay. A culturally competent counselor must also be an agent of social justice. So now we're talking a little bit more about advocacy. So has the skills to intervene not only at the individual client level, but at a systemic wide level as well, or system wide level as well, in partnership or on behalf of the client. So again, now you can talk on behalf of your client, but you can all talk about it in general as well. How do I intervene to promote mental health and social justice in a culturally competent manner at both the individual and system level. So again, that requires practice, right? It also requires knowledge about all this stuff. Some of the stuff is really uncomfortable. Sometimes it's really hard to talk about. Again, practice now. Start asking questions, and let's have those conversations, and hopefully we can grow from there. All right, the challenges of cross cultural counseling encounter: do not ignore cultural differences between the client and the counselor. So, one possible outcome, when ignored or misunderstood, the distance between the relationship widens. Client can stop counseling, which is considered become an ethical issue. So, what that is saying is, if you try to pretend like none of their cultural differences matter, your client might go, oh, I don't think you understand what's going on. I don't think you understand what it means to be a black man, right? Or whatever. So they might go, this is a waste of time. I'm not going to come here anymore. And now you have moved someone or pushed someone away from counseling to better themselves when they were there to seek out help, right? And then possible outcome two is that cross-cultural competence on the part of the counselor will result in a working alliance. When you recognize that you don't know everything, but you're learning, you respect people, you're inclusive, you're welcoming, then I'm like, okay, let's try and work it out. I understand that you don't know everything about me or my culture, but let's move forward and see what happens. All right, issues to consider when entering a cross-cultural encounter. So the cultural characteristics of counseling: it is often seen that the counseling process is reflective of North American culture, class, language, and values. Yeah, because we live in North America, right? Individual-centered nature of the helping process. A lot of it is very one-on-one, right? Whereas some cultures are very collectivist or family-oriented. Anyways, openness and intimacy between counselor and client is another thing that is expected. Long-range goal setting, and using the standard English and verbal communication. And for some, that can be alienating and disconnecting. So you have to realize that we are seeing psychology from, a European influence into America perspective. But we try really hard to also bring in, again, multiculturalism, right? So to be aware that sometimes some minority or people of color go, counseling is not for my culture. Counseling is only for like white people or European people. Maybe some other ones, but not for me. That would be their attitude, right? So we need to be aware of those things and say, hey, actually, we're here just to help you get what you need. So let's talk about that. Let's work it out. And then let's try to move forward and achieve those goals for you. Okay, socio-political nature of counseling. So power differentials between counselor and client. So here's another thing. If you are a specific ethnicity, you might feel like you have more power than the other person, right? Minorities often feel powerless in certain circumstances because of the society that we live in, right? So we need to be aware and sensitive of those things. Race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, age, ability status, certain client occupies a subordinate cultural position in society. So sometimes certain minorities feel like they are less than other people, right? And that becomes an issue because that can affect how they seek counseling, why they seek help or stop seeking help, and stuff like that. So again, we want you to start to think about the fact that the counselor, you're more educated, and so people might feel less than just because you have a master's degree, right, or a bachelor's degree. There are many, many things that you might not necessarily think that people think are powerful or better. Okay. Sometimes when I meet someone I know who never went to college, they'll sometimes like say a lot, try to defend themselves when it comes to how smart they are, right? And I'm like, this is not a competition. You're good. You be you, right? But it does make sometimes people uncomfortable when they meet someone who is educated. Okay. Again, not good or bad. It's just this is how people feel. Okay. In issues to consider when entering a cross-cultural encounter: the client's experience through racism, sexism, ageism, classism, heterosexualism, xenophobia, and ableism. So let's talk about these things really quickly. Racism, obviously, we all know that. Sexism is males, females, and how society treats them differently, right? Ageism. Sometimes when you see someone who's older, you're like, ooh, you're old, boomer. And then you treat them in a different way or a negative way. There's also the opposite, which is when you're young, like a Gen Zer person, right? You're like, oh, you know nothing, Gen Z. You hear that, people, right? It doesn't feel good to be criticized either way, Boomer or Gen Z. Classism is about wealth and your status, right? Heterosexism is the belief that people who are straight are the best compared to people who are LGBTQIA, right? Xenophobia is the fear of foreigners, basically. So this is something that you hear a lot when it comes to certain religions. Let's say, for example, Muslims, that people are really afraid of them. So that would be considered xenophobia. Okay, and then ableism is talking about how people who do not have disabilities, who are able to do things, are better than the people who have disabilities, which is not true. But this is how sometimes people see a certain group of people, right? When there is a cross cultural encounter that is forced, mandated by a person of power, the client can perceive the counselor as insensitive or unresponsive within the system. So, a person who realizes or sees a power structure, they might be defensive, they might be very, very defensive and try to fight or ignore or do all these types of like kind of defense mechanisms, right? So we want to be aware of those things so that it doesn't necessarily affect what's going on with your counseling situation. Power and privilege. So, power and privilege is a major theme in any counseling relationship. We talked a little bit about that before. Just because you have more education than your client, that already shows that you have more power than them, right? Counselors may deny or conceal their power, ensure it is competently directed to help a client become empowered. So what that is saying, hey, I'm here, I went to school because I want to help people, and you have been asking for help. So maybe we can work together. I can offer some of my experience onto, what you are asking to have help with, and let's see, maybe we can do something together. It's important that counselors reflect on the nature of the cultural privilege that they possess due to the color of their skin, their gender, their sexual orientation, their age, their socioeconomic status, their ability status, or other social and cultural characteristics. So let's even look at this picture you see on this slide. A Band-Aid, right? When you say nude, people will automatically think of kind of like a peachy color, right? Because that's kind of more of a white or European skin tone. So if you look at it, both pictures have a Band-Aid, but one is colored of the skin of that person, right? So there is, when you go to the store and you buy it, you're not going to get one that is going to be darker. You're going to get that peachy one because that's considered every person's Band-Aid, right? Or everyone's skin color. And it really isn't. And we just accept it. Typically, people are born with a specific skin color or gender, right? So that just happens. People who are born with privilege generally tend to be unaware of the unearned benefits that accrue from privileged status. Privilege gives the individual who has its distinct cultural, social, and economic advantages. So here's an example, okay? All right, so we talk about white privilege, and for some reason, it gets really uncomfortable, and I don't understand why. Well, I do. The reason why is because people are making it a monolith, right? Here's the thing. We live in a society where white people are less questioned. Okay, so here's an example. You go into a expensive store, right? If you are a minority, let's say a black person, you might see that people who work at the store will follow you. Okay, and it makes it feel as though they think you're going to steal something, right? But when they see someone who is white come in, they might not necessarily follow you. Okay, so it's not because anyone hates a specific person, right? Let's say the white person. It's just white people need to realize that there is privilege for being white. Okay, this is what they're saying in this slide. And it's not your fault at all. And you can be a white person who is very poor, right? And experience exactly the same thing as a person who's black or Hispanic or Asian or Native American or indigenous, right? It's not about that. It's about the appearance and how people automatically feel a certain way by just looking at you. Okay. And white privilege is because in our society here, white is considered like the standard. Does that make sense? I hope so. Let's have a conversation in class if you don't. Intersectionality. The multiple dimensions that comprise cultural identity have an effect on an individual's personal identity and development. Each dimension is linked with all the other dimensions. So, what intersectionality is the fact that we are multiple characteristics. When you see someone, you're going to see a bunch of things: their race or the background, their gender, their religion potentially, sexual orientation, their ability status, which is about disabilities, socioeconomic status as well. So when you see someone, you're actually seeing a bunch of things all at one time, right? So that's what intersectionality is. You're not just a person who is Hispanic, right? You are not just a person who is male. You're a Hispanic male with a disability who is gay, right? So it actually is talking about many levels. And so some levels you might have a lot of power or privilege, whereas other parts of who you are actually do not have any power at all. So it's going to be a little bit more complex because of it. Does that make sense to you all? Okay, historical hostilities, long-term patterns of exploitation or oppression between one group of people who is favored on the basis of their ethnicity, religion, gender, social class, and politics. In their collective experience, people from devalued groups harbor conscious and unconscious negative emotions produced by tradition of brutality and frustration, which they and their forebears suffered at the hands of the group that is favored. So right here, what we're saying is that racism and intersectionality has existed forever, right? And because it has been, here forever, certain groups of people have not been able to get out of where they are. Like, let's say in their communities, opportunities like as in work and stuff like that, because of because they're a person of color or something like that, right? Or because they're gay, right? So all these things we want to consider and think about. Okay. Obviously, we know that this is a long-term historical systemic thing, and we cannot just fix it overnight. Okay. So as we talk about our cultural history in America, we have to bring up certain things such as the enslavement of Africans in America. Very unique. Obviously, there are slaves in many other countries, not just people who are African, but of other cultures as well. But in America, definitely it's a huge talking point, right? Because there's hundreds of years that have brought us to where we are when it comes to how we see Black Americans. All right. Violence against LGBTQIA people, religious intolerance directed towards those who are of the Muslim faith. So these are different components of intersectionality that are discriminated against, right? And so we want to be able to just discuss it. Motivating forces, obviously here we're talking about our racism, heterosexism, and then xenophobia. And again, xenophobia is afraid or the fear of the foreign, right? Because we really don't know who you are, so we think that the stereotype is true about you. Manifests itself in intense negative feelings, overtly or covertly. So sometimes people get very angry and sometimes they get very scared inside. Resistance to counseling might be a reason why people don't come, because they don't feel comfortable with the people that are providing the counseling. The dominant culture saying what's correct over a minority. Sometimes they don't feel well that you are based off of a European perspective, right? And how can that be effective for a person of color? Obviously, in psychology and counseling, we have been, since the 1990s, talking a lot about multiculturalism and how different ethnicities are able to apply these theories into different cultures. Sometimes, though, some people might say, oh, you know what, your problem is not really a problem. And that is problematic right there, because we want to value everyone's problems and say, if it hurts you, it's a big deal. I get it, right? All right. Viewing counseling as something that is done to an individual rather than with. Sometimes people think that the counselor will tell them what to do and say say exactly what's on their mind, and that's it. And then the client will just follow it, but it really isn't. The field is actually quite misunderstood, right? We hear people say, well, I'm paying you $150 an hour. Tell me just what to do. I don't want to talk about, like, how I'm feeling right now. Just tell me how to solve this problem. But that's not what counseling is. Unfortunately, sometimes I think the movies and stuff like that make us think this way, but it really isn't. Distrust of the counselor and the process, silence, passive aggressive behavior, and premature termination are areas how people might develop their feelings about the differences and then avoid counseling or not do counseling. Language preferences. Language is also the culture. Mastery of language generally implies a master of the culture. Verbal and nonverbal communication is a cultural phenomenon involving in the use of symbols and meaning that are culturally defined. So how you behave without even talking, people can try to understand what's going on, right? With coming from a culture. So even like the way that a person looks at another person, the way that they might sit in a chair might convey certain types of meaning. The same words or gestures can have different meanings depending on the cultural context in which they are used. And that's for sure as well. Language can be very misleading. This is why we need to ask for clarifying statements and stuff like that, or ask clarifying questions for specific answers. Failure to respect language differences in counseling relationships leads us to misunderstandings and possible alienation. So if we don't understand what's going on with this person through verbal and nonverbal, we might not understand who they are as a person. So again, this is why cultural competency is so important. Appreciate the language dynamics. So you need to also understand that language changes all the time, and you should be good with that. Is it annoying sometimes that you have to change your wording? Yes. But you know what? It's not a big deal. You can do it. It's totally fine. We'll just move along, right? Although sometimes we don't see that happening. And in America, we sometimes hear that quite a bit in social media. And I don't know what your feelings are. I would love to hear what your thoughts are. Okay, appreciate the language dynamics. Clients must be able to tell their story in a manner that is most comfortable and appropriate for them. So maybe this is talking about a little bit about code switching, right? Which is that you feel like as a person of color, maybe you feel like you have to talk in a certain way. Otherwise, people don't understand you. What we're trying to say is we appreciate you for who you are, right? So hopefully we can maybe meet in the middle somewhere. All right, help-seeking attitudes and behaviors. Great variability among cultural groups with respect to help-seeking attitudes and behaviors. Not all cultures understand the nature of formal counseling as a source of help. Yeah, again, some cultures, they don't believe in it at all, or they think it's not helpful, or they'll say, oh, why are you saying our personal family business outside in public to other people? You should keep us all within the family. But when you do that, you might keep it in an unhealthy family, right? So again, depending on the culture, they might have very specific viewpoints on counseling. Religious institutions or spiritual centers are important sources of psychological support. So for some people, they seek help out within their cultures, temples, and churches. It might be necessary to form consultative relationships with religious spiritual leaders or helpers, healers, for the benefit of the client. So as a professional, if you know that the person is very religious in a specific way, you might want to reach out and talk to religious spiritual leaders to see, have a conversation and see if you can understand it a little bit more or include them in the counseling. All right, involving key others in the counseling process, immediate and extended kinship networks must be considered as primary sources for promoting mental health and normal development among many cultural groups. So sometimes you're going to need to talk to their immediate and extended families, their friends, and their community cultural resources as well, so that we get an understanding of who this person is overall. Networks can have hierarchical structures. Hierarchical basically means that there are different levels, okay? So networks can have different levels of structure and cultural roles that provide unity. Collectivism versus individualism. So that's talking about cultures where culturalism basically means, or collectivism basically means we're depending on each other in a family to get through this. Whereas an individualism, which is very American, which is I can do it all on my own. I'm going to do everything. I don't need anyone's help, right? And obviously there are goods and bads in both of them, right? But when we're talking about a person, we just need to know where they're coming from so that we understand why they're choosing to do something when maybe if they just ask for help, they would be able to achieve it really easily, right? In some circumstances, collectivist cultures may prevent a person from seeking help outside, again, because they say, keep it all in the family. A counselor that understands and appreciates the roles of collective dynamics is more likely to reach a client. So when you understand that some people are collectivists and some people are individualists, and can you work with them, then that's where you can start to meet them and have them understand what's going on from your perspective as a counselor. All right, we're at the end of this chapter. Bye.